Leslie Morgan had ruled over the Oak Ridge Estates neighborhood for years. As the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, she treated the community like her personal kingdom, micromanaging every minor detail. She issued fines for the most trivial infractions: mailboxes that weren't the exact HOA-approved shade of beige, trash cans left out 5 minutes past collection time, and holiday decorations she deemed too flashy. But beyond her obsession with rules, Leslie had another trait that made her truly loathsome. She was a racist. Most of the neighborhood either feared or tolerated her, unwilling to challenge her authority. But everything changed the day Danny Bennett moved in. Danny was everything Leslie hated: a black man in an upscale, predominantly white neighborhood. He was tall, well-dressed, and drove an expensive car. The moment she saw the moving trucks outside his house, Leslie's blood boiled. To her, he didn't belong. She convinced herself there had to be something suspicious about him, despite knowing nothing about him. She began harassing Danny almost immediately. First, she claimed his house number plaque wasn't HOA compliant. Then, she accused him of letting his grass grow too long despite it being neatly trimmed. But the worst came when Leslie saw Danny casually walking to his mailbox one evening. Without hesitation, she dialed 911. "There's a strange man loitering near the houses. I think he's trying to steal someone's mail," she told the dispatcher, feigning concern. Minutes later, police arrived, demanding Danny show ID. He complied, cool and collected, but when they saw his driver's license and home deed, they realized Leslie had wasted their time. With nothing to charge him for, they left, irritated. Leslie, however, refused to back down. Leslie escalated. She started watching Danny's house, looking for any excuse to call authorities on him. If he had guests over, she reported suspicious activity. If he worked in his garage, she claimed he was running an illegal business. The worst moment came one evening when Danny was sitting in his parked car outside his home, finishing a business call. Leslie, peering through her curtains, smirked and called the police again. "There's a man sitting in a car outside. I don't feel safe," she said, voice dripping with false fear. The police arrived quickly, this time approaching Danny aggressively. They ordered him out of the car, questioning him as though he were a suspect. Danny, frustrated but composed, explained he was on a call, outside his own home. Then, one officer recognized him. "Wait, aren't you Danny Bennett? The guy from Bennett Tech?" Danny nodded. The officer's entire demeanor changed. Bennett Tech was a multi-million-dollar tech firm, and Danny was its CEO. Leslie, watching from her porch, paled. She had assumed Danny was just some nobody she could bully. She had no idea he was a wealthy and well-connected entrepreneur. That night, Danny made a decision. Leslie had crossed the line for the last time. Instead of getting angry, he would use his power to destroy her. He had resources, he had connections, and now, he had motivation. The game was about to change. Danny sat in his home office, scrolling through files on his screen. With his resources, it hadn't taken long to launch an investigation into Leslie Morgan's past. He had access to elite private investigators, forensic accountants, and legal analysts, tools Leslie never imagined her enemy could wield. And what he found was worse than he expected. Years ago, Leslie had worked as an executive assistant at a mid-sized financial firm. On the surface, it looked like she had simply resigned and moved on. But Danny's team found something deeper, a massive embezzlement scandal. The company had lost over $200,000 through unauthorized fund transfers, and someone had taken the fall for it. Danny dug deeper and found the scapegoat: Daniel Wright, a former employee who was fired, arrested, and convicted. He had served 4 years in prison before finally getting out. The trial records painted a clear picture. Daniel had been framed. And the person who had thrown him under the bus? Leslie Morgan. Danny's stomach turned as he read through the case. The evidence against Daniel had been shaky at best, but a trusted co-worker testified against him, sealing his fate. That co-worker was Leslie. She had played the victim, shifting all the blame onto him while walking away completely untouched. Now Danny had proof. Bank statements showing Leslie had received unexplained deposits around the time of the embezzlement. Internal emails revealing that she had access to the accounts Daniel was accused of stealing from. A witness, one of Leslie's former colleagues, who was willing to confirm that Leslie had orchestrated the whole thing. It was an airtight case. If this information went public, Leslie wouldn't just lose her standing in the neighborhood, she could face legal consequences. Danny leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He could call the police right now. But that wouldn't be enough. Leslie had tormented him, humiliated him, and treated him like a criminal for no reason. Now it was her turn to feel powerless. With a smirk, he printed out every damning document, sealed them in an envelope, and stepped outside. Leslie's downfall had officially begun. The next morning, Leslie stepped out onto her porch, stretching as she picked up her mail. She paused when she saw an unmarked envelope sitting on her welcome mat. Frowning, she bent down and picked it up. Inside was a thick stack of papers, and one chilling note. "You called the police on me for picking up my own mail. I wonder what they'll do when they see this." Her hands began to shake as she flipped through the documents. Bank statements, court records, a signed testimony from a former coworker. It was all there. Her entire past laid out like a confession. This wasn't possible. Leslie's stomach dropped. If this got out, she would lose everything. The HOA presidency, her spotless reputation, even her freedom. Panicked, she stormed down the street and banged on Danny's door. When he opened it, she shoved the papers toward him. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. Danny met her glare with a calm, almost amused expression. "It's your past catching up to you," he said smoothly. Leslie gritted her teeth. "What do you want?" Danny stepped forward, his voice firm but composed. "You're going to step down from the HOA. Permanently. You're going to issue a public apology for the harassment you've put me through. And you're going to stay out of my way, forever." Leslie let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Or what?" Danny's expression darkened. "Or I make sure this story gets out. To your neighbors. To the media. To your old company. And to the police." Leslie opened her mouth to argue, but she had nothing. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. And she knew it. Leslie sat frozen in her living room, staring at the resignation letter in her trembling hands. She had no choice. If she didn't comply, Danny would destroy her. The HOA had been her domain, her source of power, and now it was being ripped away. At the next community meeting, she stood before the homeowners, forcing a tight-lipped smile as she announced her voluntary resignation. But the moment she finished speaking, someone in the crowd muttered, "We all know why." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience, confirming her worst fear. Danny had told them. It wasn't just her stepping down. It was her public disgrace. She returned home in a daze, but the nightmare was just beginning. Within hours, local news stations picked up a shocking new story. Ex-HOA president exposed for framing innocent man in embezzlement scandal. Danny had sent an anonymous tip to every major outlet. The details spread like wildfire: her role in the financial fraud, the wrongful conviction of Daniel Wright, and the possibility of criminal charges being reopened. Within days, her phone was bombarded with calls from reporters and former colleagues. Her old employer filed a lawsuit, seeking damages for the embezzlement she had covered up. The police reopened the case, and an investigation into her finances began. But that wasn't the worst of it. Her social circle abandoned her. The same neighbors she once controlled now avoided her like the plague. Once invited to elite gatherings, she was now blacklisted. When she showed up at her usual brunch spot, the women she had once gossiped with whispered behind their hands, sending her dirty looks before moving to another table. Her husband, embarrassed beyond belief, packed his bags and left, telling her coldly, "I didn't sign up to be married to a criminal." With her reputation in ruins, her bank accounts under investigation, and no allies left, Leslie was officially finished. Danny walked down the street, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt since moving in. The HOA was finally free of Leslie's tyranny. Without her constant harassment, the neighborhood actually felt like a community again. At the next homeowners' meeting, people cheered when he arrived. A once skeptical neighbor shook his hand. "I misjudged you, man," he admitted. "Glad you're here." Danny had never needed their approval, but he had earned their respect. But there was one last thing he had to take care of. With his legal team, he reached out to Daniel Wright, the man Leslie had framed. Daniel had never received real justice. His conviction had stained his record, making it impossible to rebuild his life. Danny funded his legal appeal, hiring the best attorneys to clear Daniel's name. The courts reviewed the new evidence, and within months, Daniel's conviction was overturned. Leslie's lies were finally exposed at a national level. As for Leslie, with her bank accounts frozen, her house seized, and criminal charges looming, she had no choice but to leave town. She packed up what little she had left and disappeared, humiliated and alone. For years, she had tormented people, judged them, and abused her power. Now she was the outcast. Meanwhile, Danny thrived. Free from HOA nonsense, he enjoyed his peaceful, drama-free home. And every time he picked up his mail, he smiled, knowing he had won.